About 5 years ago in my community, we were saddened to hear of the news of the tragic death of Maria Lauterbach. Maria Lauterbach was a Marine who came forward to report the sexual assault that she had endured and came forward and reported her belief of a subsequent pregnancy from that sexual assault, only to have the Marines inform her and the accused of the sexual assault, the perpetrator, that they would wait until her baby was born, and when the baby was born they would do DNA testing, and if the DNA testing showed that in fact the baby was the accused, that then they would move forward with prosecution. And until then they left the two in close proximity until the accused murdered Maria Lauterbach in her 8th month of pregnancy and burned her in her backyard in a bonfire. It's at that time that I saw that the issue of sexual assault in the military was not just one of unacceptable numbers. It was an issue of an environment where victims were re-victimized and perpetrators felt safe. Mr. Speaker, a recent survey in the military indicated that 28,000 service members have reported that indicated that they were sexually assaulted, but less than 3,000 of those were willing to actually report it in a manner that would result in charges against their accused. We think we know why, because 62% of the slightly less than 3,000 indicated that they felt that they were persecuted in the workplace for having done so. They were re-victimized. What we're doing in this NDAA is to ensure that that culture shifts, that the perpetrators are those that fear the system and the victims are those that will feel embraced. We changed the relationship between the commander and the victim, moving the responsibility for both the prosecution and the handling of those cases, and diminishing the direct commander's authority over the disposition of sexual assault cases when a conviction has occurred. We expand legal counsel for victims, making certain that victims have beside them someone who can advise them in the legal processes. And we remove the chain of command's authority in the disposition of these cases and establish a mandatory minimum. And it says, if you are a trainer or if you are...
I yield an additional 2 minutes, Mr. General. Gentleman is recognized for 2 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We include mandatory minimums that say if you commit a sexual assault, you are out of the military, you will be dishonorably discharged, and if you are a trainer and you enter into a trainer-trainee relationship that is inappropriate, you are out. No longer will a victim be forced to salute their predator or their accused. These provisions are incredibly important. They're ones we worked with on a bipartisan basis. I want to thank my co-chair of the Sexual Assault Prevention Caucus, Nikki Tsongas. I also want to thank the ranking member, Adam Smith, and the chairman, Buck McKeon, and also the chairs of the Subcommittee for Personnel, Susan Davis and Joe Wilson. This is a matter in which we've worked together very thoughtfully, at the same time that we know that Chairman Dempsey and Secretary Hagel and the former Secretary Panetta have made this a significant issue to address in the military. We're trying to do it on a legislative basis to give them the tools to once again make perpetrators fear the system and hold them accountable. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Gentleman yields back. Gentleman from Florida reserves. A gentleman from Massachusetts.
Mr. Speaker, I'm happy to yield 2 minutes to the gentlewoman from New York, the ranking member of the Financial Services Subcommittee on Capital Markets and Government-Sponsored Enterprises, Ms. Maloney.
Gentlewoman from New York is recognized for 2 minutes.
I thank the gentleman for yielding and for his leadership, and I commend the work of Mr. Turner and others for strengthening protections for women in the military, but it's not enough. The amendments from Jackie Speer and other women leaders were not included. We need an open rule where all of these ideas can come to the floor to protect our men and women in the military. The status quo in the military is not a way to solve the problem of sexual abuse. Too often it is the problem. Every year that I've been in Congress, the military brass has come to us and said that they will stop this abuse. Yet each year it seems to be getting worse. Women are even afraid to report it. They're then afraid that they'll be punished in some way. Despite the widespread public and congressional outrage, some top military officers still seem to resist important fundamental changes to a culture that has clearly failed in one of its single most important missions, keeping its own people safe, and the casualties are mounting every day. For example, a U.S. military officer overseeing sexual assault prevention at Fort Hood in Texas is under investigation for his sexual assault of soldiers. The officer in charge of the Air Force's sexual abuse prevention program was recently arrested for groping women. We need to end the culture of tolerating the abuser and punishing the victims. We created a database for them to report in, but they won't report because they are afraid of retaliation. Too often they've seen if you're a woman who's been raped and abused, then you're told to be quiet. If you report it, you'll be punished. But if you're the abuser, you might end up in charge of the sexual abuse prevention program and get a promotion. The strongest military in the world has got to learn how to protect its own soldiers. It's got to keep them from being wounded by rape and sexual assault. We need to stop this, allow an open rule, allow amendments on this important protection of our soldiers.
Gentleman from Massachusetts reserves. Gentleman from Florida is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I just want to make sure that everybody knows that there was almost 300 amendments that have been submitted, and they'll be discussed tomorrow, or I'm sorry, later today. And Mr. McGovern, as part of that process, will be discussing those amendments today. But I agree with both of my colleagues as it relates to sexual assault in the military. Having only been on armed services now for 6 months, I will tell you that I agree with Mr. McGovern, particularly as it relates to oversight. And I believe that this Congress should exhibit and utilize its oversight capacity to the fullest, especially as it relates to sexual assault within the military. And with that, I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman reserves. Gentleman from Massachusetts.
Mr. Speaker, I'm happy to yield 1 minute to the gentlewoman from New York, the distinguished ranking member of the Committee on Appropriations, Ms. Lowy.
Gentlewoman from New York is recognized for 1 minute.
Mr. Speaker, military cohesion is eroding, trust is disintegrating throughout the ranks as sexual assault infests the services. An Air Force officer charged with sexual assault prevention efforts here in Washington was arrested for sexual battery last month. West Point and the Naval Academy have made recent headlines about assaults involving athletes. Alarmingly, the military academies reported 80 cases of sexual assault last year, a 23% increase, and too many cases go unreported. We trust the service academies to mold our sons and daughters for service to our country. Cadets and midshipmen are of an impressionable age and a vulnerable age, requiring stronger protections against sexual assault and better support for victims. The culture that is propelling this epidemic must change. I urge support for the sexual assault provisions in the NDAA, and I yield back the balance.
Gentlelady yields back. The gentleman from Massachusetts reserves. Gentleman from Florida is recognized.
I continue to reserve.
Gentleman reserves. The gentleman from Massachusetts.
Mr. Speaker, I'm happy to yield 3 minutes to the gentleman from Rhode Island, the ranking member of the Armed Services Subcommittee on Intelligence, Emerging Threats and Capabilities, Mr. Langevin.
Gentleman from Rhode Island is recognized for 3 minutes.
I thank the gentleman for yielding. Mr. Speaker, while I rise in opposition to this rule, I want to express my strong support for the underlying bill, H.R. 1960, the National Defense Authorization Act. This legislation is not perfect. However, it ensures support for our men and women in uniform who sacrifice so much on our behalf, and includes provisions that are crucial to our military's future capabilities in this fiscally constrained environment. Now, among other things, it fully supports the President's request for the Peerless Virginia-class submarines, as well as critical future enablers such as the Ohio-class replacement and the Virginia payload module. It also includes the oversight of Sensitive Military Operations Act, which for the first time requires prompt notification to the defense committees of any overseas lethal or capture operation outside of Afghanistan, including those conducted with unmanned aerial vehicles. Furthermore, I'm pleased that this measure begins to tackle the epidemic of sexual assault in our military. Our people in uniform need to know that they are protected from and against sexual assault. And God forbid, if there is a sexual assault that occurs, that the perpetrator is held accountable. While far more must be done, there are important first steps in this bill that are worthy of our strong support. Mr. Speaker, I'm also proud to work closely with Chairman Mac Thornberry, both in this bill and in the numerous other provisions which fall under the jurisdiction of the Subcommittee on Intelligence, Emerging Threats and Capabilities. Together, we have worked hard to increase resources for our Special Operations Forces who are helping us confront shifting threats in unconventional battlefields and to support our efforts in the cybersecurity realm. And there are many other positive steps with regards to cyber in this legislation, including incentivizing new cybersecurity standards, ensuring U.S. Cyber Command has the proper authorities and the personnel, and coordinating cybersecurity efforts with related disciplines. However, the reality is that our nation's cybersecurity challenges cannot simply be handed over to the Department of Defense. With the vast majority of our critical infrastructure in private hands, we absolutely must require minimum standards for their owners and operators. It is way past time for Congress to move aggressively to partner with the private sector and address what I believe is our greatest national security vulnerability. Meanwhile, though I applaud DHS's efforts to coordinate the various approaches to cybersecurity found across the federal government, I continue to believe that there must be an office within the White House with the policy and budgetary authority to enforce appropriate actions across the whole of government. I'm disappointed that procedural and jurisdictional issues precluded offering such an amendment to the NDAA, but I'm going to continue to work with my colleagues to enact what I believe to be a crucial provision. Finally, I want to thank Chairman McKeon and Ranking Member Smith, as well as Chairman Thornberry, all of my colleagues on the committee, but most especially the tireless House staff for all of their efforts, which have been really Herculean in bringing this bill through the process and bringing it to where we are today. And I certainly urge my colleagues to support the National Defense Authorization Act. And with that, I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman's time has expired. The gentleman from Massachusetts reserves. Gentleman from Florida is recognized.
I reserve.
Gentleman reserves. Gentleman from Massachusetts.
Mr. Speaker, I'm happy to yield 2 minutes to the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Castro.
The gentleman from Texas is recognized for 2 minutes.
Thank you to my friend, Mr. McGovern, for yielding. Mr. Speaker, I rise today to speak about the U.S. detention facility at Guantanamo Bay. Continued operation of the facility at Guantanamo weakens U.S. national security, wastes resources, damages our relationships with key allies, and reinforces anti-American propaganda led by groups like al-Qaeda to recruit new enemies against the United States. In a time of war, the Commander-in-Chief must have the flexibility to execute important foreign policy and national security determinations. This includes how to treat detainees captured on the battlefield. The Commander-in-Chief having this authority is not a new concept to this Congress. In fact, under President Bush, some 530 detainees were transferred from Gitmo with Congress's support. Restrictions placed by Congress to prevent this President from making these decisions are not prudent. In addition to foreign policy and national security considerations, the facility at Guantanamo is also a waste of scarce resources. DoD estimates that the cost to run Guantanamo Bay is around $150 million a year. In a time when we're making sequestration cuts to programs here at home, we're spending approximately $1 million per detainee each year. This makes Guantanamo Bay literally the most expensive detention facility in the world. I urge my colleagues to give the President the flexibility he needs to operate Guantanamo Bay. I yield back my time to Mr. McGovern.
Gentleman yields back. The gentleman from Massachusetts reserves. Gentleman from Florida is recognized.
Continue to reserve.
Gentleman reserves. Gentleman from Massachusetts.
Mr. Speaker, I'm happy to yield 2 minutes to the gentlewoman from Maryland, Ms. Edwards.
Gentlewoman is recognized from Maryland is recognized for 2 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Sexual assault in the military continues to be a serious problem. Given both the headlines and the reality, this is an understatement. It impacts thousands of servicemen and women each year. And while Congress has investigated and discussed this problem for more than 2 decades, the issue remains pervasive. It's time for us to act. Recent reports that assault is happening by individuals who are supposed to protect and command our service members makes this all the more concerning. According to a recent 2012 Pentagon survey, an estimated 26,000 sexual assaults in the military occurred in that year. That's a 35% increase since 2010. It means that roughly 70 servicemen and women are sexually assaulted every single day. And I know from my own long history and experience of working on these issues that where there are 26,000, there are many, many more. And we know that only a fraction of these incidents are reported, fewer than 3,400 reported incidents every year. Sexual violence has a long-standing impact on servicemen and women and their families. According to the Service Women's Action Network, while experiences of sexual violence are strongly associated with a wide range of mental health conditions for men and for women veterans, military sexual trauma is the leading cause of PTSD among women. Due to shame, guilt, or fear of not being believed, fewer than 15% of these sexual assaults are reported to the proper authorities. As a former domestic violence and sexual assault advocate, I understand that coming forward is an unimaginably tough thing to do, and I commend every single one of the men and women who had the courage to come forward and name their accused. Their fear of coming forward is not imagined, it's real. Victims of sexual assault face a lack of confidentiality, protection, support, and access to legal counsel once an incident is reported. This is profound in the military, and it has profound consequences. We have to act to stand together as a Congress, as a nation, to declare that the problem can't go on, and we have to work now to stamp out the violence within the military. We have to ensure that the Guard and Reserve have response coordinators available at all times regardless of their duty status, and to ensure that each service has a robust investigative team with clarity and consistency among the services.
Additional 1 minute.
Thank you.
Is recognized for 1 more minute.
Thank you. Our hope is to ensure that zero tolerance for sexual assault in the military is the norm. And so I want to say that some have pointed to a culture issue within the military that contributes to the problem. You know what? That might be true, but we cannot use culture as an excuse. It has to be a challenge and a commitment to change throughout the chain of command. Some have pointed as well to say that this is just endemic within the military. As somebody who grew up in a service member family, one of 4 daughters, I can't lay this blame on the fact of service. I know that in the civilian sector, a relatively small number of perpetrators commit the overwhelming number of crimes. And so let's root out the criminals within the military. We have to commit ourselves to making sure that we do that and hold them accountable, hold their commanders accountable, punish people for crimes, and stop promoting perpetrators and transferring the problem from one installation to the next installation. And this enforceability and accountability has to happen throughout the command structure. No excuses and no exceptions. It's the service that my father sacrificed for and that millions of others do that we have to honor, and we do that by protecting the men and women who serve and by saying to them, we want you to serve your country, but we want to make sure that you can do it in safety and that those who are criminals are held accountable. And with that, I yield.
Gentlelady's time has expired. The gentleman from Massachusetts reserves. Gentleman from Florida is recognized.
Continue to reserve, Mr. Speaker.
Gentleman reserves. Gentleman from Massachusetts.
Mr. Speaker, I'm happy to yield 1 minute to the gentlewoman from California, Ms. Capps.
Gentlewoman from California is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank my colleague from Massachusetts for yielding time. I rise in support of the progress this underlying bill makes in combating military sexual assault. Sexual assault in the military continues to be a serious problem. In 2012, an average of 70 servicemen and women were sexually assaulted each and every day. This is unacceptable. Moreover, only a fraction of these are reported. Fewer yet are prosecuted. More needs to be done at every level to establish comprehensive, uniform solutions. So I'm pleased to see that this bill offers a renewed determination to stop these unacceptable crimes that undermine the strength and honor of our military. The included provisions make progress to increase transparency with new victim protections and services and improved processes to hold offenders accountable. But we must do more. We must work diligently to put an end to this problem so we can again, with full confidence, encourage our daughters and sons to serve this great country. And I yield back.
Gentlelady yields back. Gentleman from Massachusetts reserves. Gentleman from Florida is recognized.
Continue to reserve.
Gentleman reserves. Gentleman from Massachusetts.
Mr. Speaker, I'm happy to yield 2 minutes to the gentlewoman from California, Ms. Spear.
Gentlewoman from California is recognized for 2 minutes.
Mr. Speaker, thank you, and I thank the gentleman from Massachusetts for yielding me time. 70 men and women serving in the military every single day are sexually assaulted and raped. While we sit here and we talk, that's going on. And for over 25 years, we have known about this problem and we have done very little. Aberdeen, Tailhook, the military academies, Lackland. All of these are happening under our collective watch, and we have found it acceptable to hold hearings, to bring the brass up here, have them say the right words, zero tolerance, and then we would go about our business. That is not good enough. And while the NDAA has some good fixes on the end of the process, we still have much to do on the front end. There is a reason why there are 26,000 sexual assaults and rapes a year in the military, and only 3,300 have the guts to come forward. It's because if you come forward, you're retaliated against. Some 63% are retaliated against. And of those 3,300 that report, only 500 of those cases are going to go to court-martial, and only 200 will end up in a conviction. So why would anyone report? Because your odds of getting justice are just not there. And that's why it is important for us to have a debate on this House floor about taking these cases out of the chain of command. If it's in the chain of command, then you have the potential of having the assailant be the person making the decision, or the person making the decision, the commander, being the friend of the assailant, or the commander itching for a promotion, who is fearful that if they find out that there was a rape under their watch, that they won't get that promotion. Other countries have similar uniform codes of military justice. Ours is based on the British system. And the Brits and the Canadians and the New Zealanders and the Australians and the Israelis have all taken these cases out of the chain of command. And it's working. It's time for us to have that discussion as well, and I urge my colleagues to embrace an amendment that I will take up in Rules Committee that will at least give us the opportunity to have this debate, this healthy debate on the House floor. Otherwise, I will guarantee you, in another 6 months, in another year, we will see yet another scandal, and we will not have changed anything.
Gentlelady's time has expired. Gentleman from Massachusetts reserves. Gentleman from Florida is recognized.
Continue to reserve.
Gentleman reserves. Gentleman from Massachusetts.
Mr. Speaker, I yield 1 minute to the gentlewoman from New York, the distinguished ranking member of the Committee on Small Business, Ms. Velasquez.
Gentlewoman from New York is recognized for 1 minute.
I thank the gentleman for yielding. Mr. Speaker, I rise in opposition to this rule. Our armed forces face an epidemic that is tearing away at this institution's moral credibility. Millions of patriotic young men and women who are considering donning our nation's uniform must contend with the fact that our military has become a safe haven for sexual assault and rape. According to DOD's own estimate, on average, 70 service members are sexually assaulted every day, with 26,000 of these incidents occurring last year alone. That represents a 30% increase from just 2 years before. Keep in mind, this is the Department of Defense data. It is likely this problem is even more widespread than these numbers suggest. Equally troubling, only a sliver, about 3% of these cases, were prosecuted. The horrifying fact is that tolerance of sexual assault has become part of the armed forces culture. In too many cases, victims are further harmed by a system that protects offenders in the name of the chain of command. This is unacceptable. It must change, and it must change now. The men and women who serve our nation.
Gentlelady, additional 30 seconds.
Thank you. The men and women who serve our nation sacrifice enough. They should not have to worry about sexual assault at the hands of superiors and colleagues. It is time for real steps that end this permissive culture, hold sexual offenders accountable, and restore trust in our armed forces. I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentlelady yields back. Gentleman from Massachusetts reserves. Gentleman from Florida is recognized.
Continue to reserve.
Gentleman reserves. Gentleman from Massachusetts.
Mr. Speaker, I'm happy to yield 1 minute to the gentlewoman from California, Ms. Brownlee.
The gentlewoman from California is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you to the gentleman of Massachusetts for yielding my time. It has already been stated, but it is worth repeating again. In 2012, 26,000 service members were sexually assaulted. If only one service member was assaulted, that is one too many. Sexual assault in the military is intolerable, period. It is a terrible, entrenched cultural flaw of our military that allows victims to be abused without accountability or justice. While there are a number of legislative proposals to address this issue, the consensus is clear. We need a fail-safe solution that increases transparency and accountability so that the military no longer is a place where sexual assault is tolerated. I am pleased that H.R. 1960 takes steps to improve the military justice system. However, I do believe the bill does not go far enough. We must do a better job. I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentlelady's time has expired. The gentleman from Florida is recognized.
Continue to reserve.
Gentleman reserves. Gentleman from Massachusetts.
Speaker, I have to yield 1 minute to the gentleman from Minnesota, Mr. Ellison.
Gentleman from Minnesota is recognized for 1 minute.
Mr. Speaker, I am loath to turn attention away from this critical topic, and I agree with all of my colleagues on it. But also part of this rule is the H.R. 2656, which is entitled the Swaps Jurisdiction Certainty Act. This is a closed rule. They're not allowing any amendments on it, and it is bad policy. I urge members to vote no. This bill reminds me of the old adage that's often said that the past isn't dead, it isn't even past. I'm referring to the global crisis, the global financial crisis that a few years ago had every member of this body absolutely on razor's edge as we wondered what was going to happen to the American economy, and we ended up seeing the TARP pass and all types of things to try to avert collapse. $13 trillion in lost wealth, Mr. Speaker, and still here we are looking at a bill in a closed rule, mind you, that would allow offshore derivative swap trading to be beyond the jurisdiction of American regulators.
30 seconds.
The gentleman is recognized for 30 seconds.
Let me just cut straight to the chase. Congress granted the Commodity Futures Trading Commission explicit authority in the Dodd-Frank Wall Street Reform Bill and Consumer Protection to oversee all derivatives transactions with a direct and significant connection to the U.S. economy. That's a good idea. $223 trillion industry. I think we need to protect our interests. Vote no on this closed rule, and I guess I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Gentleman from Massachusetts reserves. Gentleman from Florida.
Continue to reserve.
Gentleman reserves. Gentleman from Massachusetts is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I yield 1 minute to the gentleman from California, the distinguished ranking member of the Committee on Financial Services, Ms. Waters.
Gentlewoman from California is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you very much. I rise to oppose the closed rule on H.R. 1256. H.R. 1256 really has no business being hidden in this DOD bill at all. It is another attempt to keep the debate from taking place so that people will know what is happening when we are trying to have a regulatory regime that will protect us from having to bail out big institutions. We're simply saying that we can't allow our financial institutions to have subsidiaries overseas that are doing business and trading and putting us at risk every time they get involved in a trade where they don't have comparable rules in that country. What we're doing is putting this country at risk that we're going to have to bail out a big institution, financial institution, because the harm will come right back to the parent company. We, in Dodd-Frank, have said that we must have comparable rules. We must have regulatory regimes that are comparable to ours in order to do business and do trading, in order to protect against big institutions failing. And so now we have this H.R. 1256 that would undo all of that and drag it back into the shadows. This derivatives trading put us all at risk, and we can't even debate it. We can't even have an amendment because, again, they're trying to kill Dodd-Frank.
Gentlelady's time has expired. Gentleman from Massachusetts reserves. Gentleman from Florida is recognized.
Continue to reserve.
Gentleman reserves. Gentleman from Massachusetts.
I would like to inquire from the gentleman from Florida how many additional speakers he may have.
None.
All right. How much time do I have left, Mr. Speaker?
Gentleman from Massachusetts has 2 minutes.
Oh, okay. Well, okay. But then that's more time than I thought I was going to have. I'm going to yield an additional minute to the ranking member of the Committee on Financial Services to continue to make her case.
Thank you so much.
Gentleman from Massachusetts.
Thank you so much. I do appreciate this. This is so important. And I'm against this closed rule simply because we have mandated the kind of reform in Dodd-Frank that would keep us from ever being in the position where we have to bail out these big institutions. And now we have so much organized pushback and undermining of Dodd-Frank where they're attempting to undo the reforms that we have done. Simply put, we cannot allow the branches and subsidiaries of these big broker-dealers, these big banks, to go over and do trading with countries that don't have comparable rules. If we allow that to happen, we will be forced with what we have seen with AIG, where we had to bail them out to the tune of billions of dollars, and supposedly we've done reforms to keep them having to be in that position again. We will find that we will be experiencing again what happened with Goldman Sachs and others who end up being the beneficiaries of our failed regulatory regime. And so I'm opposed to the closed rule, vote against the closed rule, and then vote against the bill.
Gentlelady's time has expired. Gentleman from Massachusetts reserves. Gentleman from Florida is recognized.
I continue to reserve.
Gentleman reserved. Gentleman from Massachusetts.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'll close. I yield myself the remaining time.
Gentleman is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I get it. The Republican majority wants to repeal Dodd-Frank, and they're using every possible vehicle they can to undermine Dodd-Frank, which I think puts consumers at risk by their constant attack on protections that I think most people in this country think are reasonable. But as you heard from Ms. Waters, the ranking member on the Committee on Financial Services, and from Mr. Ellison, there's controversy around this bill. The thought that you would bring a bill like this to the floor that would weaken Dodd-Frank under a closed rule is really unforgivable, quite frankly. We ought to debate this stuff. This is important stuff. There ought to be debates. There ought to be amendments. On the defense authorization bill, I just want to say this for the record. While I have no opposition to you bringing the DOD bill up for general debate, I do want to express my concern that when the Rules Committee considers the amendments, that they be fair-minded about it, and that all major issues, including the issues raised by a number of my colleagues with sexual assault, are addressed. But I also want to say the war in Afghanistan ought to be debated on this floor. That is a central part of our defense budget right now, is going to this war. And last year we were shut out. I'm hoping that this year we will at least have the opportunity to bring an amendment to the floor, debate what our policy should be, and let members on both sides vote up or down. I urge my colleagues to vote no, because this does allow H.R. 1256 to come to the floor under a closed rule. That is wrong. This should be a more open and transparent process, especially when it comes to something, an issue so important. With that, I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman's time has expired and he yields back. The gentleman from Florida is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I support this rule and encourage my colleagues to support it as well. It allows the House to take action on two different but very important pieces of legislation. It provides us with an opportunity to force the SEC and the CFTC to finally and jointly promulgate rules governing U.S. institutions' use of swaps and other financial derivatives while accessing international markets. This action will help ensure that we have a vibrant financial system and American companies can manage the risk while remaining competitive in the international market. Additionally, it begins our consideration of the National Defense Authorization Act, providing the House with an hour of general debate and programs that make up our Department of Defense. As a member of Congress and a 3 Blue Star parent and an American, I think of nothing more important than providing our military the tools that they need to carry out their mission. These brave men and women put their lives on the line for our nation each and every day. This legislation isn't a thank you to the troops. It's our duty as citizens to acknowledge that we live in a land of the free only because of the service of the brave. You know, Mr. Speaker, we've heard a lot of discussion here on the floor, particularly as it relates to Dodd-Frank. First of all, this does not repeal Dodd-Frank. If it were a vote for repeal of Dodd-Frank, I'd vote for it, but it's not. a repeal of Dodd-Frank. As a matter of fact, this piece of legislation, the SWAP Act, was actually voice voted out of Agriculture Committee that has joint jurisdiction over this piece of legislation. Voice voted. And in the Committee Financial Services, 100% of the Republicans and 2/3 of the Democrats voted for its passage. So it isn't exactly as one would hear the other side say. As we talk about open rules, I think one of the things that distinguishes this Congress versus the 111th Congress is that this is one of the most open Congresses in the 112th versus the 111th that had absolutely zero open rules. I remind my colleagues of that just because as we talk about this and move forward on both of these issues, it's important to know that we have an open rule coming up where we have almost 300 amendments that we're going to be considering in the Rules Committee in just a short period of time with the NDAA. And lastly, I hear my colleagues talk about how for 25 years they've allowed sexual assault to go unabated. I can't hardly stomach the fact that this body would allow that to happen over the last 25 years. As a former law enforcement officer, one who vigorously prosecuted cases of sexual assault and rape, should be no different for our armed services. And that is where my good friend Mr. McGovern had mentioned about the oversight of armed services and of this House to make sure that we hold people accountable, to make sure that, as other members have talked about, to make sure that members of our military are kept safe, and those that would prey upon members of their own military unit find swift justice. So there's nobody can say that there is not justice in regards to the fact if you commit a rape or a sexual assault in the military that you'll be prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law, and that we make sure that we have victim advocates for those who are assaulted, that we have good investigators that focus on those types of crimes and have the forensics to back it up so you have a strong prosecution. And I think that's what this NDAA bill is an attempt to do. I strongly support the bill and the underlying legislation. And with that, I yield back the balance of my time, and I move the previous question on the resolution.
The gentleman yields back without objection. The previous question is ordered. The question is on the adoption of the resolution. All those in favor say aye. Those opposed, no. The ayes have it. Mr. Speaker, from Massachusetts.
On that, I ask for the yeas and nays.
The yeas and nays are requested. Those favoring a vote by the yeas and nays will rise. A sufficient number having arisen, the yeas and nays are ordered. Members will record their votes by electronic device. Pursuant to Clause 8 of Rule 20, this 15-minute vote on adoption of House Resolution 256 will be followed by 5-minute votes on motions to suspend the rules on H.R. 634 and H.R. 742. This is a 15-minute vote.
The House wrapping up a rather extended rule debate because the rule covers a couple of bills. One would alter provisions of the 2010 Dodd-Frank financial regulations law. The other, and general debate will be on this later as well, is the 2014 Defense Authorization Bill, which sets $522 billion in defense spending, also $86 billion in spending for overseas contingency operations, including the war in Afghanistan. First vote, this is 15 minutes on that rule for both bills. A series of 3 votes on the House floor. This first one is 15 minutes. It's a rule vote, covers 2 bills, one dealing with making changes to parts of the Dodd-Frank financial regulations law. The other bill covered by the rule is the 2014 fiscal year 2014 defense authorization bill. And for some background on that bill, we spoke to a Capitol Hill reporter.
Jeremy Herb, staff writer at The Hill. House lawmakers plan to spend their work week on a bill reauthorizing programs at the Defense Department. What are some of the key issues coming up in the debate?
There are a lot of big issues. Probably the biggest is going to be the fight over sexual assault in the military and how the problem should be addressed to curb the number of assaults that have occurred over the past year. Congresswoman Jackie Speier has been pushing in committee, and she wanted to take the decision to prosecute cases away from military commanders. That was rejected by the Armed Services Chairman, Buck McKeon, and so it's not in the bill. And I think that's going to be one of your major flashpoints. There's also going to be fights over the war in Afghanistan, over a new East Coast missile site, and the total funding level of the bill as well, as the bill is $52 billion above the cap set by sequester.
So you mentioned those spending levels and the budget caps. They're under the sequester. How do the leaders justify changing that?
Well, it's interesting because the Pentagon itself submitted a budget for 2014 that was $52 billion over, and then the House budget and the Senate budget that passed also kept it at the higher levels. What Armed Services leaders on the House side say is that they want this funding. They don't want sequester, and so by legislating to a lower level, they would be, in their estimation anyway, encouraging the sequester to take effect. And so they say there still is time to try and stop sequester in 2014, even though there's no momentum right now on the Hill to actually do away with the cuts.
What does the bill say about House Republicans' priorities?
Well, I think particularly missile defense is a big one that they're pushing this year. They want to establish a new site on the East Coast for ground-based interceptors to try and guard against future threats against Iran. The Armed Services Committee put $140 million for the 2014 budget in that bill. You're going to see attempts this week, as we saw last week in committee, for Democrats to strip that out. That is probably the biggest partisan issue. Republicans have also, put a step forward on the importance of dealing with sexual assault. McKeon, the chairman of the committee, signed off on the changes that were made. And you also saw an increase of $5 billion to the amount of spending for the war in Afghanistan. And that money is going to readiness accounts that were hurt because of sequester this past year.
What are Pentagon officials saying about the bill?
Pentagon officials, I think, have generally been supported. There have been complaints because they tried to cut costs through a new round of base closures, new health care fees for military health care, and making a smaller raise for troops last year. And the Armed Services Committee rejected all of those. They say that it's not fair, and they disagree with the Pentagon on the usefulness of base closures. The administration has put out its statement of policy and is threatening to veto the bill. It frequently does that, at least over the past few years, particularly over detainee issues in Guantanamo, which is a new priority now for the president. The bill, as passed by the Republicans, bars the president from moving any detainees from Guantanamo to U.S. soil.
And on the other side of the Capitol, how's the Senate bill shaping up?
This week, the Senate Armed Services Committee is marking up their bill. It's a little different process because the Senate markup for the full committee is mostly done in a closed session, whereas the House committee was here until 2:15 in the morning doing their markup. The Senate is opening up one section on sexual assault where you're going to see a proposal from Senator Gillibrand talked about. She's trying to take the decision to prosecute cases away from commanders. Carl Levin, the senator who's the chairman of the committee, does not agree with that, and he instead is establishing, or is seeking in the bill to establish a review process for when commanders don't prosecute the cases.
Jeremy Herb is a staff writer at The Hill. Appreciate your time.
Thank you.
The House is voting on the rule for debate for that defense authorization bill. It also covers another bill, a bill that would change part of the Dodd-Frank financial regulations law. It's the first of 3 votes here. It's a 15-minute vote. Jeremy Herb mentioned in that interview the issue of sexual assaults in the military likely to come up in the House floor debate. That's ahead. Meanwhile, the Armed Services Committee in the Senate is holding today a public review of the sexual assaults provision in their version of the 2014 Defense Authorization Bill. That markup is underway, and you can follow that. We're covering that live now over on cspan.org. House Speaker John Boehner said today he plans to vote for the latest farm bill when it hits the House floor, which is likely to be next week. He spoke to reporters earlier this morning about the Republican agenda.
Morning, everyone. You know, after Friday's jobs report, it's pretty clear that the economy is not growing the way the American people want it to grow. We've had 4 years of anemic economic growth. I believe the President's policies continue to get in the way of small businesses and investors willing to invest in this economy. That's why House Republicans are going to continue to stay focused on our economy and the issue of jobs in our country. In addition to that, the House has passed a student loan bill to make sure that interest rates on students doesn't double on July the 1st. The Senate had a couple of show votes last week, but I'm hoping that they're going to be willing to sit down with us and the administration to resolve this issue. We've done our job. It's time for the Senate to sit down with the House to make sure that students aren't harmed in this by the lack of work in this Congress.
Morning. Over the past few weeks, there have been stories after stories that have eroded the trust in our government. And Americans shouldn't really have to worry whether their government is going to hold their political beliefs against them, as it seems the IRS is doing, or whether their government is telling them the truth. So I think it is imperative for all of us here in Washington to work together to restore our trust in government, and that includes the President and members of his administration. The House will, along those lines, continue to conduct serious investigations into potential wrongdoing throughout all of these revelations of recent weeks. However, as the Speaker indicated, we will remain focused on the issue of job growth and the issue that every day faces American families, and that is their economic concerns. The surest way to address folks' economic concerns and the economy as a whole is to make sure that our education system is functioning and is accessible. And as the Speaker indicated, we've done our work. We recently passed the Smarter Solutions for Students Act. It is a bill that would reduce many interest rates immediately and will prevent them from doubling under the statute. This is very similar to the President's own proposal that had been unveiled earlier last year. But Democrats need to join us. They've got to stop playing politics, and let's begin to govern and protect these kids.
In response to the jobs report last week, the chairman of the President's Economic Council, Alan Kruger, said that we're on the road to recovery. Well, it's clear that the administration's definition of recovery is different from the rest of the country. When you consider that 4.5 million Americans have been on unemployment for more than 27 weeks. When you consider that recent college grads still are having a very difficult time finding a job. In fact, their unemployment is nearly 25%. And it's not recovery when you consider moms and dads and the struggle that they have just to buy groceries, pay for gas at the pump, and make ends meet at the end of the month. What we need is a real commitment to those policies that are going to get Americans back to work, get economic recovery, and that is our priority in the House this Congress.
As of 2 weeks ago, I'm an official empty nester. I moved my youngest to college to start summer school, and my oldest moved into her first big girl apartment off campus as she starts her senior year of college. And I told them both the same thing. I hope they will come home if they want to. But want is the key word there. I don't want them to have to come home because they can't support themselves or find a good job. And as Kathy mentioned, today 50% of college graduates can't find a job or are underemployed. That's 1 in every 2 graduates. the employment rate in this nation is as high as it's been in 3 decades. That's why House Republicans are committed to our plan for economic growth and jobs. We are determined to create opportunity, grow this economy, so kids like my own don't have to come home because they can't support themselves.
You know, this last weekend I was speaking to a group of individuals and was telling them about the need for a healthier economy, talking about an energy plan where we prioritize American energy, where we talk about making sure that families can be more successful, that they can get jobs, talking about the low labor participation rate that we saw in this last report, how many people just simply aren't even out there in the workforce anymore. A woman stood up and started to tell me her story. She told me how her husband, who once had a full-time job, now was reduced to 28 hours a week because of regulations that came with Obamacare. She told me about 2 of her 3 children who are teenagers who can't find summer work because it's simply not out there. She told me about how if their family wants to go to church, if they want to play baseball, any of that, they will put hundreds of miles on their car a week and then try to figure out how they're going to pay that gas bill and buy groceries. That's why this team up here is so committed to dealing with bills that deal with the problems that every American is dealing with. That's why we prioritize talking about a healthy economy, why we want to make sure that we open up new opportunities to use our energy resources in this country, why we need the Keystone Pipeline. We have so much to deal with out here in Washington, D.C. with all of the scandals and the oversight. The House is focused on doing oversight on this White House because it's important to know that they are doing the right thing by the American people. But I'll tell you what, we're not going to stop dealing with all the other issues that every other family out there has to deal with as well. We're going to continue to work to make sure that our students can get educations, that they can pay their loans off when they're done, that when they're done they can get jobs, that they can have a pursuit of the American dream just like all of us had the opportunity to do decades ago. It's our job to protect that, and that's what we're going to continue to do as a Republican team.
Questions?
Has there been a overgrowth of contractors when it comes to the intelligence services? And if there is, what can be done about that? In the case of Snowden, we've been hearing about this all the way since the Iraq War. This is a particularly bad case. Is there something Congress should be doing about contractors and their access to this?
Well, I think the committees of the Congress provide oversight of the executive branch. And I frankly think you can look at any agency of the federal government. They've got a number of federal employees. But there are also federal contractors that are used for certain programs. I think that's fair and appropriate. But I think it's up to the committees of the Congress to provide that oversight, and I think we will.
Do you think, though, that this idea to shrink government, make it smaller, farm some of this work out, that this has led to a situation?
I'm not sure that that is the cause of this, but we're going to continue to look at it.
I wanted to ask you about your meeting this afternoon with the Sandy Hook victims. I understand that you got this meeting, but what are you hoping to accomplish with this? Is this just a courtesy call, or is there something that you can find from this that's time for you?
Well, the families have asked to meet with us. Our hearts and souls go out to these families and the tragedy that they've all been through. And so they've asked of them. We're willing to sit down and talk with them about their interest.
Yesterday, Senator Ted Cruz of Texas said that it was kind of pointless for the Senate even to pass their immigration bill because the House is going to wildly change it and end up stopping it. Is the House going to stop immigration reform?
Listen, we're walking ourselves through a process over at the Judiciary Committee that I think will certainly yield a product that we expect to bring to the floor. We've got a bipartisan group that's had very fruitful conversations, and I think we're likely to see soon some of their work. Reforming our immigration system is an important project of this Congress. We've got big problems, and they've gone on far too long, and it's time for us to address them.
Last question.
When you say we'll see it soon, does that mean this week? Does that mean next week? And the other day you had said you hope to get this, whatever immigration reform comes through Judiciary Committee by the end of June. I talked to some folks in Judiciary who said that might be kind of tough. I mean, how do you envision this playing out?
Well, the Gang of Seven, they're working on drafting their bill. I'll let you ask them when it's going to be available. All I know is that they've done really good work. The leadership continues to work with Chairman Goodlatte over at the Judiciary Committee on a product that they may move forward. This is the wheels of Congress working. Not glamorous, but a lot of people putting a lot of effort in to address a problem in our country, and I'm glad they're doing it. All right.
Would you vote for the Farm Bill as it stands today?
I've got concerns about the Farm Bill, as I told our members, but doing nothing means that we get no changes in the farm program, no changes in the nutrition program. And as a result, I'm going to vote for the Farm Bill to make sure that the good work of the Agriculture Committee and whatever the floor might do to improve this bill gets to a conference so that we can get the kind of changes that people want in our nutrition programs and our farm programs. Thanks.
And the House is on the back end of a rule vote here on the defense authorization bill for 2014. It also covers a bill that would make changes to part of the Dodd-Frank financial regulations law. The rule passes, general debate later for both of those bills. So 146 votes remaining or so. We'll bring you some of the comments of Democratic leader in the Senate, Harry Reid, who also talked about the Senate's immigration bill, their immigration and border security bill. We'll show you as much as we can of his comments from this morning on the Senate floor.
Last night, the United States Senate advanced a bipartisan immigration reform bill that will be good for national security and really good for the economy. It will be good for American citizens as well as those who aspire to one day become citizens. It's truly gratifying to see the momentum behind this common-sense reform proposal. 84 senators voted to adopt the motion to proceed to this legislation, a very, very strong vote. By comparison, the Senate failed to advance immigration reform bill just 6 years ago when only 46 senators voted to end debate on that measure and allow us to proceed. It is a sign of progress that the legislation now before the Senate has not been stopped procedurally. I hope, Mr. President, that we're allowed to proceed in this legislation without being blocked by some arcane Senate rule, that we can finish this legislation and send it to the House of Representatives. I applaud the Gang of Eight. It's a bipartisan proposal, and that's how the Senate used to work. They have worked hard. They've worked through hundreds of different proposals. In the committee alone, after the Gang of Eight finished, it went before the Judiciary Committee. There was over 100 amendments, many more than 100 amendments. They adopted 46, and some 40 amendments were Republican amendments that were adopted. So Chairman Leahy conducted a fair markup. No one disputes that. So I commend the Gang of Eight for allowing the bill to get to the Judiciary Committee and the Judiciary Committee for giving us now this proposal on the floor, and now Democrats allowing us to proceed on this legislation as well as Republicans. Our goal now is to pass the strongest legislation possible with as many votes as possible while staying true to our principles. Then await what the House is going to do. The Speaker has said he wants a bill that will allow the Democrats to vote. Mr. President, that is really good news, because in the House for the last two Congresses, there are very few opportunities for the Democrats to vote on substantive legislation. The Speaker has said that he will only allow legislation to pass over there that has a majority of the majority. That means only Republicans. If they don't have enough Republican votes, they're not going to bring a bill up for a vote. So I'm very pleased that the Speaker would say that. It's important that we understand the procedure we've used for 230-plus years in this body. We pass something here, you pass something in the House, we go to conference and work out our differences. So I understand, Mr. President, that we have a long road before us, and more work will be necessary to get this bill across the finish line. I truly understand that. And I know some of my Republican colleagues will support this bill if they feel confident what's in the bill adequately addresses the need to secure our borders. And I agree that the legislation focused on border security a lot. I think that's important. I'm glad it did. Reform that takes significant steps
to stop illegal crossings is important, and reform that does not take significant steps to stop illegal crossings will fail. That's why I so admire what was done by the Gang of Eight and the Judiciary Committee in regard to this, Mr. President. They've done really a terrific job on border security. And we should also acknowledge the progress President Obama's administration has already made to secure our borders. Illegal border crossings are down 80%. That's no small accomplishment. And yesterday I received a letter from my colleagues, the Chairman of the Judiciary Committee, Pat Leahy, and the Chairman of the Homeland Security Committee, Tom Carper, detailing the tremendous strides we've made toward a more secure border. As described by the Wall Street Journal, illegal entries nationwide are at a 4-decade low. We have less crossings now than we had at any time during the last 40 years. And the number of illegal entrants who sneak into the country through the southern border and successfully elude law enforcement, so-called getaways, that's what they're called, is down 86%. Smarter technology, physical barriers, and double the number of agents at the border have made this achievement possible. We must ensure those who come to America seeking a better life do so in compliance with our laws. The measure before the Senate builds on the progress we've made by allocating even more resources for border security infrastructure, and that includes patrol bases, unmanned vehicles, yes, Mr. President, drones, helicopters, fixed-wing aircraft, sensors, X-rays, cameras, and more. And it also includes, this legislation, additional funding for prosecution of those who are caught crossing illegally. The legislation also establishes 2 strict but attainable statutory border security goals: to prevent 90% of illegal entries and to monitor the entire southern border, not just high-risk sectors of the border, the whole border. Chairman Leahy and Chairman Carper agreed. In their letter, they said, this legislation will reduce illegal entries by reforming our legal immigration system. This legislation will make it virtually impossible for undocumented people to work, so they'll no longer have an incentive to enter illegally. This is what my 2 colleagues said in their letter. Quote, we need to stop focusing our attention on the symptoms and start dealing with the underlying root causes of illegal immigration in a way that's tough, practical, and fair. That says all, Mr. President. This bill does that. But there's one thing this bill does not do and should not do. It does not and should not make the path to citizenship contingent on attaining border security goals that are impossible to measure. That would leave millions who aspire to become citizens in indefinite limbo. We've got to move past this. 6 years ago, we tried to do something about it, and the situation only gotten worse. This legislation is critical. Mr. President, if we made those goals impossible, the legislation would be a failure. This would give opponents of citizenship both an incentive and an opportunity to prevent our border security goals from being met in order to block the path to citizenship. I'm concerned that some who oppose the very idea of reform see these triggers as a backdoor way to undermine that legislation, and we must be very careful in recognizing people are trying to do that with this legislation now before this body. I believe some Republicans with no intention of voting for the final bill, no intention, regardless of how it's amended, seek to offer amendments with the sole purpose of derailing this vital reform. I commend Senators, Democrats and Republicans who sincerely want to make this proposal stronger by enhancing its border security provisions. So I look forward to hearing the ideas the next few days on amendments and ideas to make our country safer and more secure. If that's the intent of this legislation, we'll certainly look at it, and I hope we can move forward as expeditiously as possible. I'm glad colleagues, both Democrats and Republicans, are engaged in this debate and interested in offering amendments. But I hope those amendments will be constructive in nature. We have come too far, and the country needs this legislation too badly to lose sight of our purpose now. As Martin Luther said, quote, everything that is done in the world is done by hope. And there's no better example of that, Mr. President, than this legislation. Because hope is what it's all about. As Martin Luther said, everything that is done in the world is done by hope. I certainly believe that with this legislation.
And debate continues in the Senate on that bipartisan comprehensive immigration measure. Back on the House floor, they're just about ready to approve the rule for debate on the defense authorization bill for fiscal year 2014, also a bill that deals with rules concerning financial swaps. Two more votes will follow. These are on suspension bills debated earlier dealing with changes to the 2010 Dodd-Frank financial regulations law. On the 2010 defense authorization bill, the White House yesterday threatened to veto the bill because of numerous policy provisions. If they approve the rule here, which looks likely, debate on that later this afternoon.
The resolution is adopted. Without objection, a motion to reconsider is laid on the table. The unfinished business is the vote on the motion of the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Henserling, to suspend the rules and pass H.R. 634, on which the yeas and nays are ordered. The clerk will report the title of the bill.
Union Calendar number 74, H.R. 634, a bill to provide end-user exemptions from certain provisions of the Commodity Exchange Act and the Securities Exchange Act of 1934 and for other purposes.
The question is, will the House suspend the rules and pass the bill as amended? Members will record their votes by electronic device. This is a 5-minute vote.
One of the